Welcome to the fourth episode of the Revolution of Purpose podcast. My name is Kova, and this is
Tracy.
We've got an exciting podcast for you today. The last conversation, we really went deep into Tracy's call to adventure and what that looked like for her and how she really had to leave her old life behind to step into the new, which was very new for you. We also got to learn about some of the people that you got to meet along the way and how some of those experiences sculpted you as a person and changed the trajectory of your life.
So today we're going to be diving into more of Kova's story. What actually brought her to this way of being that she is now, and how it has completely revolutionized her purpose. Leading up to the fast, where were you? What were you feeling? What was it like? What was your life?
Yeah, well, so before the fast, I was working a 9 to 5 in corporate America, and I had gotten like what my dream job was at the time, working in like downtown Austin and like the office looking over the river and, Mac computers with all of the Whole Foods catered lunches and getting paid really well. It was like the Google of social media marketing that I was working in. And I got fired, and it completely caught me off guard. I'd never been fired in anything in my entire life. And I was shocked, completely shocked, so much so that I actually took time off to take a look at myself and be like, okay, what is it that I actually want? And what I was actually wanting was to heal my body. I was having issues with my hormones and menstruating naturally. I started looking into alternative types of medicine, which led me to go through this really long list of alternative therapies to learn about all these different things that I didn't even know existed, which eventually led me to find something called the Institute for Nutritional Endocrinology, which basically is using nutrition to balance your endocrine system. And your endocrine system is what's in charge of balancing your hormones. And while I went into that world, I met my first master teacher, Dr. Rita Marie Lascalzo, the founder of the Institute for Nutritional Endocrinology. And I really woke up to a level of health that was much more root cause than I had ever experienced before. I had grown up with really great doctors, but they were primarily focused on the symptoms and not why things were happening. And this journey eventually led me to start doing healing protocols, which eventually led me to realize I had a food addiction. And that food addiction is what actually gave me the awareness that something needed to change and what I was doing wasn't working anymore.
Okay, so you went on this whole healing journey. Why?
Well, I wasn't getting my period, and I hadn't got my period when I was 16. So they did a bunch of testing when I was 16, and they found there was a cyst in my pituitary gland. And I'm not going to go too much into the details on that right now. I did what Western medicine told me to do. I initially took hormonal replacement as a 16-year-old to get my period, which I was the pill. I literally took the pill to be able to get my period. It wasn't to not get pregnant or to be able, you know what I'm saying? It was literally to get my period. And then I was in bed with my boyfriend in my early college experience, and I literally had like stuff coming out of my nipple. It was like milk like coming out of my nipple. And I was like 18 or 19 at the point. I was like, absolutely not. Like, I'm not going to do that. And that led me to seek what I thought was the solution at the time, which was actually them drilling into my sinuses and pulling the thing out, which they actually found out it wasn't a tumor. It was a cyst. What eventually got me to realize that the cyst, again, was just a symptom, not a cause. I eventually went back on birth control and all the things. And then my friend died right after college from mixing Adderall and alcohol. And I'd been on Adderall for most of my life or some version of it. I stopped taking everything, including my birth control, and I didn't get my period naturally. I realized that Western medicine had gotten me as far as it could have, and I started seeking alternative options. Well, I mean, all of this brought me to purpose. What I ended up doing to heal my body first introduced me to purpose. I had no conception or idea about living purposefully or being in alignment with my purpose. None of that stuff was even in my awareness until what we're talking about started.
You weren't getting your period. You start working with an endocrinologist. you realize that you have a food addiction.
Yeah. And full context, I've been working with endocrinologists for years, like Western medicine, MD, endocrinologists. The endocrinologist I was working with was a nutritionist, a certified clinical nutritionist. She's like the highest level of nutritionist that there is. She's also DCN. She has all these different degrees. So she had more of an integrative lens on endocrinology, which was very different than the endocrinologist that I was being brought to when I was younger. So when I was working with her, she introduced me to the idea of like, why is something happening? Like, we want to keep asking why a symptom is occurring until we actually get the answer. And this completely blew my mind. I remember sitting in her conference when she was teaching about this, and this was completely contrary to everything that I had been brought up with. Because, you go to the doctor, they give you a pill to solve the thing. You go to the doctor, they give you a shot to solve the thing. You go to the doctor, like, there's nothing about, like, why is that symptom occurring? And so that really revolutionized the way that I looked at healing the body. And that really started my trajectory on alternative healing protocols, which ultimately did lead me to realize I had a food addiction that was preventing me from doing what I was needing to do to heal my body. My journey has been very windy. So there's not like some linear path that I've taken to get where I am. It's the opposite of that specifically. And taken lots of trial and error and lots of stumbling and getting back up. So this is the best thing that I can offer to people, is bring them in and be like, this is where I started. This is what it looked like. You might actually be experiencing something like this. And something I'm saying might be completely revolutionary to them. But I'm human. And what we're going to be talking about on this podcast sometimes makes me seem the opposite of that.
So as you were starting to recognize all these health issues,
Yep.
How were you feeling about all of it?
I was just wanting answers, honestly. At that time, I wasn't very emotionally aware of what I was going through. And in retrospect, I was addressing my emotions through eating. That's why I couldn't stick on any of the protocols, because I kept, going through these like binge type of experiences. And I was also in an environment that everything was healthy around me, even by a nutritionist standpoint, everything was healthy around me. But my relationship with how I was eating and what I was eating and the way that I was eating it basically led to what I now view as like shame spirals of sorts. And really, as I was self-sabotaging myself. And it was really deflating, because I was like needing to do all these gut healing protocols that require you to cut out sugar. And that one in particular, like, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it in a sustainable way. That made me realize eventually that I was like, oh, I just could cut out food. It'd be easier to cut out food to heal my body than it would be to be doing a specific type of diet.
And so fast forward 36 days, Kova fasted for 36 days on water. So we're going to be diving into this 36-day fast today. What her experiences were like, what she learned in the process, and a lot more that I can't even fathom at this point.
There's a lot there too. So that's one of the reasons. I know we've talked about this a little bit in a previous podcast, and the reason why we wanted to talk about it again today was because I actually haven't gotten the chance to talk about it at depth with people. What I've talked to Tracy about is that I often bring it up to people, and either they're shocked and can't process it, or it just like doesn't go into them.
Right. There's no conception or understanding of what a 36-day fast
totally.
is like.
It just doesn't go in. So today, the purpose of this episode, and however many episodes we need to really get into what we need to be able to communicate to people, to really understand, when I reflect on my journey, like, what's the biggest catalyst? That was the biggest catalyst by far. I mean, losing the job was the catalyst. And then meeting Dr. Eva Marie was a catalyst. But in terms of how much something changed me, the fast was by far the largest shifting experience I've had in my life.
Beautiful. So just to give you an idea, sometimes 36 doesn't quite land. That's a month and 6 days. To give you a conceptual time here.
Yeah. And I want to take a step back too. I started talking about and realizing that I needed to cut food out of the picture. And it's like, why did I fast, right? Like, what brought me to fast? And I want to make sure that I communicate that, because I learned about water fasting from this previous doctor. She did a 2-week one when she was younger. And she mentioned that it was life-changing for her. And so what I did was I went home and then I started researching it. And what it said was spiritual experience underneath water fasting, in addition to all these other benefits. And I've grown up Jewish, but I've never had at that point a spiritual experience. I actually had no idea what that was. So there was definitely a part of me that was just like intrigued as to like what that would mean. And I remember sitting in a coffee shop in Austin and looking at this and being like really interested in it. So that's just a little bit of context. No one actually told me to do this. It was actually my own my own intrigue and my own curiosity that ultimately led me to make the decision to, cut out food for a period of time to actually ultimately heal my body.
So, what was your purpose in all of that?
To heal my body, to heal the world.
And holding that sentence, that statement,
Yeah.
healing your body to heal the world.
Yeah.
What was that doing for you?
It gave me the ability to sit through hunger and not do anything about it.
So it was your driving force.
It's what purpose is. Yeah. Your purpose is your driving force. So no matter if I was hungry, no matter if I was a little dizzy, no matter if I stood up and had a head rush, whatever it was, or, the ability to continue not to eat purposefully was driven by that. And I also didn't have that purpose consciously when I began the fast either. It started out as a juice cleanse initially. And then when I was juice cleansing, I realized that I was addicted to food. And then I was like, well, I'm actually not even drinking that much juice. So like, why don't I just try the water thing? And I like dove into research on water fasting, which has been around for thousands of years. It's one of humanity's oldest healing modalities, and it's completely free, which the pharma companies don't want you to know.
So give us a little bit of the history and the benefits of water fasting.
Yeah, so the history and the benefits of water fasting, it's basically been going on for as long as humanity's been in existence, thousands and thousands of years. And there's a varying degree in terms of how long people will fast. Usually you'll hear it between 3 to 7 days. Sometimes they'll do that once a year, one time a quarter. It really depends on the person. But like, why fast? Well, what happens when you omit food for a period of time, at least for the first 3 days, your body, it usually uses carbohydrates as fuel. So it actually starts to transition to something called ketosis, which is using fat as fuel instead of carbohydrates as fuel. And there's a whole keto phase. And one of the beautiful things about ketosis is like, it starts to use the fat on the body to detox itself. So when you're not eating food, what happens is your body starts to go into detox mode. And so it will start cleaning itself out, basically. And again, your body this is inherent. This is completely natural to do this. You're technically supposed to use a specific type of water, but I didn't even do that. So like, I did use purified water, but you're technically supposed to use distilled water. And, people have been going into the mountains and into the desert to do this for thousands of years now. But the biggest thing that you want to take away is that it detoxes you, because usually it takes up a lot of energy for your body to be able to digest and to assimilate the nutrients of the food that you eat. So when it's not doing that, it gives it a break, and your body starts to release the toxins and the things that have been stored in it. And depending on the length of the fast, you have the ability to do deeper and deeper levels of cleanses.
So what were some of the detox symptoms that you experienced during your fast?
The first 3 days, I got woozy. So it's interesting. The first day was easy with not eating. Usually, I believe the second day or the third day was the hardest, just because my body hadn't quite shifted over to ketosis yet. And I remember distinctively, I was like laying in bed, like in the middle of the day, like sleeping, because like I just didn't have any energy. And I got on a call with one of my coaches, and that's when I told her, I was like, just so you know, I'm doing this thing, right? Like, I made the decision to do this thing. And then I alerted the practitioners around me at the time. But once I got past the first 3 days, because those are the hardest, it got a lot easier to, my body was already into ketosis. And what was so fascinating to me was that my memory got better. And my whole life I'd been told I had issues with my memory. So to have like such precision with being able to recall memories was just amazing and completely blew me away. And that's just one example of one of the things I experienced. No, I mean, it got clearer and clearer. So over the course of the fast, I mean, you mentioned it, it's like over a month. So like the farther into the fast that I got, and, what I decided that I was like, I'm going to do it until my body has no fat left on me, basically, which I knew would be, I knew it was going to be longer than a 10-day fast, basically. And I got really thin from this. Like, I do have pictures from this that we can include on this, and my eyes are really bright white on it. And it took time for that spiritual part to really occur. And, I hadn't done any type of inner work at that point. So for me, it was just like a reduction in energy at first. And what I found myself doing was going to a place called Casa de Luz in Austin, Texas, and spending a lot of my time there and seeing what kind of conversations I could get myself into. And then I also spent a lot of internal time in doing lots of like hypnosis and meditations and like really listening and feeling my body and bringing presence to whatever was occurring.
A lot of people would think of meditation as inner work. So what do you mean by inner work versus meditation here?
I mean, there's thousands of different types of meditation. So meditation in its very basis is, I am observing and I'm observing and participating in the experience of reality right now. Like that is step one. The point of meditation is to be present with what is. And then step two of it is to be like, you are not your thoughts. So actually starting to anchor in the observer of your experience instead of being in the experience specifically. So I had been meditating for years at that time, and I was just observing what was happening. So I was observing the stories that I was having in bed.
This was during the fast.
This was during the fast, yeah. And a lot of them had to do around getting medicated when I was younger and feeling a lot of resentment towards my parents. Yeah, so I was medicated. I was diagnosed ADD and ADHD in first grade. So there had been a lot of resentment around my parents medicating me from a really young age. And I had the story that all of that stuff was like in my body, as well as like all of the vaccines that I had ever gotten, which what you hold in the mind it manifests as true, whether it's true or not. So, what I didn't realize was I was actually learning to practice forgiveness at the time. And really just like, I remember just sitting in bed and just like letting my body do its thing. Like it was moving a lot. There was a lot of stuff moving, even though there was not any food that was occurring.
In your digestive system, or
Yeah,
where was it moving?
in my digestive system particularly. And sometimes like in certain areas, it'd be more sore in certain areas than others. So just bringing my awareness to like really sit on that and just be with whatever was occurring.
And so looking back on it, do you have any idea what was moving for you?
Just the body just letting go of things. I just fully flushed my system. But what I also did was I spent a lot of time researching the science and the art of fasting specifically. And that's there's a lot of information about it, but it's the consistent story is that it will detox you of pretty much almost anything. So people recover from cancer from it, diseases, recover their eyesight, do all these like crazy things because their body has time to heal.
So as the fast progressed, what was your experience of reality?
One of the things that I noticed the farther along in the fast that I got, and I actually wrote all this stuff down, so I have it in a digital file somewhere. I just haven't reviewed it. At some point, I'm sure life will ask me to take that stuff out, but the direct knowing. And this is talked about in like the consciousness studies that I learned. It's like at some point, like our reasoning mind, our logic and our objectivity, like the asset that makes us human, like it basically just went silent. And there was just direct knowing of whatever it was that I was needing to know in that moment. And that went on for like weeks on end, in addition to rapid recall of memories that I would never have been able to remember. It almost changed my perception of myself because I was like, oh, maybe that memory stuff isn't true, because I actually am able to recall information really quickly, actually. I remember that too, because it was like in Casa de Luz, I was like hanging out and talking to someone about something, right? And something just came through me. And I was like, whoa, like I've never been able to do that before.
And what was so astonishing about this?
Well, I had been told when I was younger that I had issues retaining, having issues putting things from short-term memory to long-term memory. So in my experience of what that really is meant is that if it's extraneous information that is relevant to me, I will not remember it and store it into long-term memory, which to me is common sense. But some people can just store random amounts of information. I'm not one of those people. And so when it showed me myself that I was like, oh, I can remember.
So you had a super clear mind to the point where you weren't having thoughts.
Yeah.
So most people have never experienced that.
Yeah, that's fair.
What is that like?
Well, I mean, I study this stuff now. So I study like higher levels of consciousness and awareness. It's one of my, I guess you could say, kinks, but I love it. And I noticed that, that specific thing isn't actually talked about until you get access to the higher levels of functioning, which, the reasonable and objective mind can only get to a certain point, and then it's actually replaced by direct knowing. I literally read this the other day and I was like, I know exactly what that is because I've experienced it. And it was a totally different way of being. There was a natural flow and synchronicity to life. And that's why, like, when I was sitting in Casa de Luz, I didn't go around and try to meet people. I would just make myself present and allow for things to occur. And I've never been that way before. I grew up in an environment that was very constricting, and we must make things happen and we force things to get done, and we must control the outcome and how it occurs and what occurs and when and how it's done, and very controlling environment. And so to be really connected to something higher, I'd never been connected to something higher before. I've had like sparks of insight from when I was a kid that was like telling things that were about to happen, right? Like with precognition.
Mhm.
I've had precognition when I was younger, but precognition is like you get insights here and there. This was like 24/7, like direct knowing, which, just changed the way that I was functioning in the world.
So how did that show up? How did you interact with that direct knowing? How did it inform your doing this?
Well, I actually let go of my work for a period, most of this fast, actually. So I stopped working as much because I needed energy to be able to work, and food provides you energy. So I just spent a lot of time allowing for me to do whatever it is that I was knowing to do. There's not anything that's just like coming off the top of my head as in terms of that experience, other than, at the end of the fast when my body had gone through all its fat, I was expecting that direct knowing to still be there and to tell me when to eat. And it didn't actually. And that's actually why I didn't eat. And I actually waited to eat until 3 days after my body was complete fasting. And why I started to go downwards, because I had gotten used to direct knowing for so long at that point that I didn't catch it, that it stopped actually.
So you noticed that once your body was done, your direct knowing stopped.
Yeah. So to give you a little bit of context, I was in the rolling hills 2 hours outside of Austin, Texas. I was at the end of the fast, and I was working with a practitioner at the time, again, who was not promoting the fast. She actually didn't want me to be fasting, but she was still observing me during it. And she was another nutritionist. And she had this device that gave you the ability to measure your body composition. And so I got to see how much body weight my body was going through on a weekly basis. And we were able to basically tell exactly how much longer I would have until my body ran out of fat. And we were right on, actually, given the rate that my body was eating its fat while it was detoxing itself. So when I was out at this Airbnb in this beautiful place somewhere outside of Austin, I remember sitting in some chair, just like looking out at the abyss, basically, and wanting an avocado, right? But you have to also understand, like, that whole time I'd be like craving food, but I didn't. But I had the willpower and the drive and the purpose to not eat, right? I had to do that for days and days and weeks to choose not to eat, right? Because we still get hungry. Like, even like 3 weeks into the fast, I would still get hungry, but I was able to be with the feeling of hunger. So whenever people say they're starving, that to me just drives me crazy, because they likely have eaten 2 hours prior and they actually have no idea what legitimate starvation feels like. So I didn't realize it, though. And I'd read in the books that legitimate starvation's actually felt in your neck and in your chest. And so I was certain that I would know what it would feel like. And, I was like participating in the group that I was a part of during this time. And they were like, maybe it's time to eat. Cause I was like looking up all these recipes and stuff, right? Even though I hadn't eaten in weeks and weeks and weeks. And like, remember just sitting there in the chair and like wanting an avocado, like something that simple, right? And not doing it, actually, because I had gotten so used to not doing it that I thought it was just another wave that was going to pass. But in reality, my body was actually complete, which ended up being there were very negative consequences to that.
So in the last week
Mm-hmm.
before you overfasted, what was your experience like?
What comes to mind is the roommate I was living with at the time. She and I like completely were not clicking at all anymore. So much so that the dog and I were actually not even clicking before anymore, which was crazy because I used to spend a lot of time with him. But during the fast, I couldn't help a 100-pound golden retriever, be walked. I just couldn't do it. He was way too strong. My relationship with her really started to splice towards the end of this. She didn't really understand what was happening anyways. I remember her being very baffled about my ability to do what I was doing, which is fair. That's completely valid. A lot of people don't understand what I did and why I did it, and they might not ever, and that's okay. The person I was by the end of this experience was very different than the person at the beginning of this experience. One of the reasons I left to go into the hill country was because she and I weren't clicking anymore. I couldn't even be in the same space actually as her. And I decided to go out of my way and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go finish this thing like by myself. It wasn't completely by myself. I was at an Airbnb with actually a healer. The woman who owned the property was a healer and she gave me a massage.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So yeah, I ended up on an Airbnb somewhere, outside of Austin. And this woman was a massage therapist and more into alternative medicine. So she had all these different books around that were interesting and very different alternative ways of healing. And, they knew I was fasting. So like they were in their own house and they had their own guest property that was like right next door. So I wasn't alone per se, but they were there. She gave me a massage and I remember actually having access to my ancestors doing it. And specifically my Nana, if I recall correctly, there was some type of conversation that I had with my ancestors. Not like, it wasn't like I was consciously facilitating it, but I had access to be able to communicate, which I didn't even know that I could do at that time.
And what was that like for you?
Surprising. I mean, this whole thing was surprising. Like my experience of reality was very limited before I did this. And, taking food out of the picture by my own choice made me realize that I was not seeing what was really going on. And I think that's true for a lot of us. Like the mind blocks us from seeing what's really there. And that's like the spiritual path starts with people going in because of suffering oftentimes, but it eventually leads to a place where you get to see a version of reality that you didn't have access to. And it really changed my perspective of life completely. So of course I wasn't getting along with my roommate. The woman she signed a lease with was very different by the end of this.
So let's start at the beginning and then the end. So what was your perception like beforehand and how did it change? Are there any stories that would...
The best story is this specific roommate. She always dated. She was always really good about dating. And she loved it, which was great for her. And she was looking at me, she's like, why aren't you dating? And I'm like, well, I don't love myself. That right there. I did not love myself before the fast. And I don't blame myself for that. I don't judge myself for it. I completely understand that I didn't love myself before the fast. I don't think I had a role model that taught me how to love myself or even did embody self-love to a level where I felt that way. And of course I wasn't in a relationship with another person. Like love, you'll be in a relationship with another person when love is ready to express itself. At the highest level, you'll naturally be in a relationship with someone when love is ready to express itself. So that was who I was before the fast. And by the end of the fast, I was completely in love with myself, but it wasn't just like an egoic type of love. It was like, I am full of love and overflowing with love, and I have love to give. And I actually fell in love with a woman for the first time through just visioning, really. This person that I trained actually in that role I was in at the time that I fell in love with through just like, meditating and hypnosis and ultimately just having so much love within myself that there was love left to give over. And that had never happened in my entire life. To be able to be that way with someone, it totally didn't sit well with them at all. I think it probably freaked them out, if anything, which makes sense. I was, on the other side of a very extreme experience at the time. But I experienced love for the first time. And it wasn't some like, you date someone and then you experience love, or you experience love with another person or through another person. I experienced love that came through this consciousness, this body and this self, right? And it basically, what was so fascinating to me was that like when I took food out the picture, There's so much self-sabotage that was occurring around my relationship with food that it was affecting my relationship with me. So when I took food out of the picture for some time, I ended up learning how to love and accept myself. And it wasn't I get to consciously choose to love and accept myself. It was like, of course, there's just like, I am part of God and God is love. And it filled up the void of my non-love that I had for myself and filled it with love.
So what was the experience? What was the perception? How did Kova or Jackie at the time experience all of this?
The perception around what that looked like was like, I'm like ready to love another person, right? Like my visuals and my imagination were imagining loving this other person. I had never had access to anything like that. And even the years after the fast, I still had this love that was wanting to express itself through me. The only thing is that life really brought it back to me to really find it within myself. It did not work effectively when doing that with another person yet. At the earlier stages after the fast specifically.
So this overflowing of love.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Everything was happening in synchronicity. And I don't want to sound trite, might not be the right word. I'm sure you would tell me, but oftentimes love is associated with miracles and synchronicities, and that was my experience. Like I was just completely living in a place of flow and synchronicities and miracles. It was just like part of the normal experience. It was constant. And I read about that in my books too. It's just like everything naturally does its own thing, right? And we think we need to do something about it, but it's actually the self, the capital S self, that is like actually the one that's participating in the self, the whole itself. Because yeah, it was just, to be quite honest, I'm still processing it. Like I study consciousness now, and I primarily study Dr. David Hawkins, a physician and MD, who really pioneered the field of spiritual science. And I do that partially because it's interesting and partially because I'm like, oh, that's what I experienced there. Timelessness. Timelessness? Oh, that's what that was. Thank you for giving me a word, because once you go past the rational mind and you start having these, and this is straight from the book I was reading the other day, The Eye of the I, Dr. David Hawkins. And once you go past the objective reason logic mind and you have access to direct knowing and just automatic synchronicities and miracles, like it's not really easy to explain, right? Like you're past the mind, basically. And I had access to a higher level of reality that I just didn't know was there. So I successfully had the spiritual experience that was indicated in the potential benefits of fasting. I had no idea what it was going to be. And quite frankly, it's hard for me to talk about because a lot of these things are non-linear. And the mind tries to put labels on them to understand what they are, but they don't really understand what they are because they're more of an essence than they are a label for understanding.
So a lot of these states are indescribable.
At the same time, it's been nearly a decade though. So like I do have some words to describe what happened, but I'm very much still processing what happened. And when I read Hawkins' books too, it's like he had experiences, and it took him a long time sometimes to be able to process and then actually bring them back into the world. So like part of us doing this right now is like, I have some of this processed. There's going to be more of it that's processed as I continue to develop myself and really understand consciousness and learn how to describe it. That's part of the reason I think I study some of the work that I do so much, is because it's giving me words to describe things that the mind needs to understand so that it could even be open to experiencing it.
So you actually studying consciousness has opened the possibility for you to go back to those states, even if you're not fasting.
Not necessarily. I don't necessarily have access to direct knowing on instance anymore, unfortunately, although it'd be really nice to have my mind be more quiet. It's giving me words to describe that experience, like peace and timelessness and complete and utter presence and unconditional love, right? Like these are all words that can be used to describe some of the states that I was in for a significant amount of time. And it's one thing to understand them, and it's another thing to actually have an embodied understanding of them. And what I mean by that is to actually participate in the experience of an essence. What is the essence of love? And what is that? What type of sensations does the observer experience when participating in love or in peace or in timelessness or in presence?
So, is there a felt sense in the body? Is it impersonal? What, if you were to translate that to something that the mind can kind of understand, what would that be?
In what regard? What do you want me to describe?
Peace, timelessness, presence, these states that you were accessing when you
Well,
were fasting.
the best way to take something like this and actually start to have an embodied understanding of them is to contemplate them. So contemplation means that we use our observer, the awareness that we cultivate during a mindfulness practice, and actually purposely bring our awareness to a word like peace, and just continuously bring our awareness back to the word. And what happens over a period of time is self-illumination, which basically is the word opens in its expression. And it could be like a satori moment, which is like a burst of insight, or it could be like an epiphany of sorts. And sometimes it can be like life shattering. Sometimes I experience that. I'm like, okay, life just totally, like, my entire worldview just changed. Or sometimes it's like enough of an insight that gets you to change your perspective on things. So one of the things I think is important when it comes to what we're talking about is that like all of these states are within us. And the way that we access them is by continuously bringing our awareness to them. So whether that's love or peace or timelessness or presence, right? Like I don't have the answers over here, even though I have experience. The answers are actually within you.
So, what's an experience, like something that we can actually talk about where your perception changed, and what was it like beforehand and after?
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example is like the beginning of the story is like I had the awareness that I was addicted to food, right? I had no awareness that I was addicted to food, but I had enough reflection at the time to realize that I was having an addiction to food. That's mindfulness right there, believe it or not, right? So that shift in awareness, my awareness of my addiction to food got me to actually fast for a long period of time.
To change your behavior.
To change my actual behavior. And that was from an insight specifically that I had. And I think we all have those in some way or form. I'm constantly meditating. I'm constantly observing. I don't have to try anymore. It's just already there. I have that anchored within this. So for me, I'm constantly reflecting and constantly observing, and sometimes I'll have an insight and sometimes I'll have a life-changing moment, but ultimately it comes from this practice of self-reflection.
So, if someone wanted to practice this at home, what would you recommend?
I mean, I would just pick one of those words or some type of state that you're wanting to experience. Some people are joy, some people are ecstasy. These are different words, but they also have different feeling tones to them, right? Like when we look at the frequency of these different words and where they sit on the scale of consciousness, they all are going to mean something differently to everyone. And the more that you bring your awareness to these things, the more that they're going to open. So I really encourage you to bring your awareness consistently to a specific state that you're wanting to experience more consistently. Like you could put like the word peace on like your mirror or something and just have you consistently look at that. And as you go about your day and you're observing and you're experiencing, you consistently bring yourself back to that word and you allow for it to open.
Wonderful. And so, for someone who has never fasted before,
Yeah.
how long would that take? Is there something to expect around that?
It's a very yin process. So contemplation itself is not like it's not a linear process at all by any means. And you could spend your entire lifetime just contemplating love.
Yeah. So you'd recommend bringing that word into your daily life rather than, say, setting a timer for 30 minutes and repeating that word almost like a mantra.
I mean, everyone's different. You might do that. For me, I have an awareness of a specific thing that I'm looking at in my awareness all the time, and I continuously come back to it. And then I watch my mind kind of like think about it and do what it does about it. And sometimes it has insights, right? And then sometimes it doesn't. And like sometimes there's epiphanies, right? But it's always kind of in the background. And, you know, everyone's different in the way that they function. Tracy doesn't like, you don't, my perception of you is that you have a lot more calmness in your mind than I do. So that might not be the right practice for you specifically. But at the same time, I think finding a state that you're wanting to learn more about, especially when you get to the higher level ones, whether it be joy or ecstasy or love or unconditional love, like all these things, like we have a very limited perception on what these things mean. And the only way that we can really access them is to bring them into our awareness and see what they have to teach us.
Any last words that you'd like to leave with us?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I want to finish on, because I want to finish that last question that you asked me, which is like, who are you at the beginning of this and who are you after this, right? And there's a lot more to this story besides the fast. The fast was like the catalyst, one of the catalysts. I've had many catalysts. I was later asked, what did I learn about myself from that experience? And I realized that if I set my mind to something, that I can accomplish absolutely anything. And I had no idea that I had that level of determination. I had no idea that I was like that. If I had known that I was like that, maybe I would be a little bit more discerning of how I use my determination. But I didn't know that I had access to that. To me, that experience really forged my perception of myself to be capable of accomplishing really rare and almost unfathomable feats when I am dedicated by something higher.
Which leads us to our next podcast.
Yeah.
Those rare and unusual.
Those rare and unusual feats that are fueled by revolution of purpose.
Until next time.
Until next time, thanks so much for joining us.